But first, the Lebanese Muslim Association has launched a blistering attack on Scott Morrison after he dared to suggest Islamic leaders should better monitor how Islam is taught in this country. In a full-page statement, they described the former Prime Minister as a failed politician struggling with irrelevancy. They called him divisive, disloyal and a political opportunist. Oh, and they suggested he should be charged, under the government's new laws, with hate speech. In today's Australia, pointing at the fire alarm is more offensive, it seems, than setting the building on fire. All of this outrage because Scott Morrison opined that, in the wake of the Bondi terror attack allegedly committed by Islamic jihadis, it might be time to think about how Islam is being manipulated to inspire violence. The statement began with this gentle love letter. The Lebanese Muslim Association wishes to make it clear the last person the Australian Muslim community would ever seek advice from is a man who failed as Prime Minister, failed as Treasurer, failed as a Senior Minister and failed to unite the country when it mattered most. Ouch. That's not an argument, that's a one-star Google review. Talk about playing the man and not the ball. I note they failed to mention Scott Morrison's greatest triumph, stopping the boats. I can't imagine why, but I digress. Next, the association demonstrated its deep engagement with Morrison's argument by listing a series of political grievances that had absolutely nothing to do with Morrison's argument. They accused Morrison of, and I quote, abandoning the nation during the Black Summer bushfires to holiday in Hawaii while Australians suffered devastation and loss. Now, maybe it's just me, but I'm not sure how Morrison's handling of the 2019 bushfire season is relevant to his comments on the 2025 Bondi terror attack, unless the radicalisation pipeline runs directly through Waikiki. The Lebanese Muslim Association then continued with a long laundry list of Morrison's failures, ending with this political mic drop. Quote, leaving behind a fractured Liberal Party now polling so poorly that its leader trails even Pauline Hanson in preferred Prime Minister rankings. Now, that one did make me laugh. The logic, see if you can follow it, is that Scott Morrison has no right to comment on Islamic extremism because Pauline Hanson is outpolling Susan Lee in the race to beat Anthony Albanese. See how that political trivia completely negates Morrison's thoughts on how to curb radical Islam. The Lebanese Muslim Association had harsher words for Scott Morrison than they did for the alleged Bondi terrorists. The funny thing is that Scott Morrison warned when he gave his speech that this would be the reaction.
Some will seek to characterise my remarks as hostile to Australia's Islamic community and even multiculturalism itself, trolling out the usual accusations of Islamophobia. To the contrary, I am advocating reforms that I believe will help religious leaders in our Islamic community keep the wolves from their flock.
When Morrison said he wanted to help the Islamic community keep the wolves from the flock, I wonder if he was expecting the Lebanese Muslim Association would be the ones to bare their teeth. After devoting half a page to smearing Scott Morrison's character, as opposed to actually addressing anything Scott Morrison said, the Lebanese Muslim Association finally got to their substantive point, and I'll quote, it is both offensive and grotesque that Scott Morrison would lecture Australians about social cohesion while speaking from Israel at a time when tens of thousands of innocent civilians are being killed in nearby Gaza. Well, I did not see that one coming, did you? How dare a former Prime Minister of Australia suggest ways to save Australians from being killed by terror attacks in Australia when Israel... Let's recap. Alleged Islamic jihadists, allegedly radicalised here in Australia, allegedly shoot 15 Australians dead at Bondi Beach on a Sunday afternoon. Scott Morrison makes some suggestions as to how the Muslim community might want to prevent people from misunderstanding their religion of peace as a licence to kill Jews in the name of God. And the Lebanese Muslim Association's response is, do something about Israel. Listen carefully to what Scott Morrison said in his speech.
Islamic leaders have a pastoral duty to protect their communities from radicalisation. And I believe most take this responsibility very seriously. However, stronger institutional frameworks would assist them, but it would also expose those who do not share their commitment.
The idea of better regulating Islamic preachers would assist them cracking down on radicalisation and expose those who do not share any such commitment. And wouldn't you know it, some felt exposed almost instantly. The Lebanese Muslim Association finished their hit piece on Scott Morrison with this. The federal Labor government has recently rushed through controversial hate speech laws. If it is serious about enforcing them, this moment presents a clear test, because if Scott Morrison's comments in Israel this week don't constitute hate speech, then Australians are entitled to ask, what does? Now, at this point, I'd like to offer some assistance to our friends at the Lebanese Muslim Association. Most Australians would probably say this might constitute hate speech.
I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride.
And this probably constitutes hate speech as well.
Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews?
And my opinion, but I reckon this would be approaching hate speech.
Towards the end of times, when the Muslims will be fighting the Jews, the trees will speak, the stone will speak, and they'll say, "O Muslim, O believer, there is a Yahudi behind me, come and kill him."
But this is not hate speech.
Given the specific involvement of radicalised extremist Islam in the Bondi terrorist attacks, Australia's response must pay explicit and specific attention to this issue. And I'm not just talking about immigration.
Nope, that's not hate speech. That's a bit of old-fashioned plain speaking. Thankfully, Multicultural Affairs Minister Anne Ali responded to Morrison's comments on Islam with the seriousness and intellectual honesty the issue deserves. I'm joking, of course. Like the Lebanese Muslim Association, the Muslim MP immediately accused Scott Morrison of vilifying all Muslims, which, of course, he did not. Anne Ali either didn't bother listening to Morrison's speech and so knows nothing of what she's talking about, or she did listen to Morrison's speech and is deliberately misrepresenting it. Either way, she found a listening ear on the ABC.
I think it's incredibly irresponsible. And I also think it's incredibly disappointing because it draws on historical stereotypes and a historical trope that continually puts the blame and responsibility and the burden on Muslim communities whenever there is any form of a terrorist attack.
A link between terror attacks and the Muslim community is based on historical stereotypes. 9/11 wasn't a stereotype, nor was October 7, nor was the Manchester bombing, the Brussels bombing, the Nice truck attack, the Berlin Christmas market attack, the Vienna terror attack, the Reading terror attack, or the London Bridge stabbing. All of those terrorist attacks actually happened and were actually linked to radical Islam, most often by the perpetrators themselves, who in every instance were members of a Muslim community. Now, does that put the blame on all Muslims? Of course not. Does it suggest that the Muslim leaders should probably be open to a conversation about how we can prevent members of their communities from being radicalised? Well, in a sane civilisation, yes. But sanity has been cancelled for being too offensive. So instead, we get the standard rhetorical trick. Accuse Scott Morrison of blaming all Muslims so you never have to talk about any Muslims committing terror attacks. Watch her do it again. Anne Ali really is very good at it.
And yet, this consistent seeking to blame the entire community, an entire faith community, for the actions of two radicalised individuals to take advantage of something like the Bondi attacks to sow seeds of discourse is absolutely abhorrent and should be rejected.
She successfully changed the subject from radical Islam to Islamophobic Scott Morrison, as if ScoMo is the real threat to Australia. While we're examining the continued meltdown over Scott Morrison's comments, it's worth making quick mention of the ABC. Now, remember, the criticism of Scott Morrison is that he's targeting all Muslims for the actions of a few. Here's ABC presenter Sally Sara yesterday.
Do you think that preachers or faith leaders from all religions should have to be registered or accredited? Why do you think it should be the Muslim faith and Muslim preachers who are targeted?
Why would that be? Well, let's be honest. Traffic bollards haven't been placed throughout our cities to protect pedestrians from Presbyterians. And airport security wasn't ramped up after 9/11 because people were worried the Dalai Lama might go off the deep end. And snipers weren't sitting atop the Opera House during the Bondi Memorial last week because there was a concern that, radical Hindus might show up demanding Jews come outside. Here's Liberal MP Andrew Bragg's response to Sally Sara.
Well, you want everything to be neutral, of course, but in this case, as I said, we have had, unfortunately, a problem where a lot of these extreme statements and extreme acts are coming from one particular part of our society. And look, we're very proud to be a diverse community in Australia, but we have to be honest and open when there are problems.
Yep, reality is stubbornly discriminatory. The hypocrisy of the left, honestly, it's hilarious. On the one hand, they abhor the idea of cracking down on one faith because of the actions of a few, and then in the next breath, they suggest we crack down on all faiths because of the problems in one. I'll give the final word, and I don't know why, but I'll give the final word to former independent MP Tony Windsor. In response to Scott Morrison's suggestion that Islamic organisations should better regulate their preachers to prevent sermons inspiring terror attacks, Windsor tweeted this: "ScoMo, I look forward to seeing you lead the way in your rent-a-gospel so-called church." Nothing like a bit of Christophobia from those upset about Islamophobia. Well, when little old ladies at ScoMo's church are being radicalised to commit terror attacks, we'll all demand action from the Christian Scott Morrison. And so we should. But until then, the problem remains exactly where everyone is too afraid to look. And that, in a country now completely addicted to comforting lies, is a massive problem.